Hey again, YouTube. It's me, Janine, and today we'll be reading Timeline by Michael Crichton. He's the guy that wrote the Jurassic Park books and a bunch of other stuff. So he's pretty good at doing science fiction kind of history-related stuff. And I won't go into how I was introduced to this book, but hopefully you guys will enjoy this book as much as I did. If you're not too big into history, then I'll be reading another book as well. Not in this video, but in another one that hopefully you might be into. So let's get this started. We're going to skip the intro because it's just about physics. Not many people want to read that. Alright, so part 1, Corazon. There's some quotes here. Anyone who is not shocked by quantum theory does not understand it, by Niels Bohr in 1927. And then somebody else said, nobody understands quantum theory. That was Richard Feynman in 1967. Alright. He should never have taken that shortcut. Dan Baker winced as his new Mercedes S500 sedan bounced down the dirt road, heading deeper into the Navajo reservation in northern Arizona. Around them the landscape was increasingly desolate, distant red mesas to the east, flat desert stretching away in the west. They had passed a village half an hour earlier, dusty houses, a church, and a small school huddled against a cliff, but since then they'd seen nothing at all, not even a fence. Just empty red desert. They hadn't seen another car for an hour. Now it was noon, the sun glaring down at them. Baker, a 40-year-old building contractor in Phoenix, was beginning to feel uneasy, especially since his wife, an architect, was one of those artistic people who wasn't practical about things like gas and water. His tank was half empty and the car was starting to run hot. "Liz," he said, "are you sure this is the way?" Sitting beside him, his wife bent over the map, tracing the route with her finger. "It has to be," she said. "The guidebook said 4 miles beyond the Corazon Canyon turnoff. But we passed Corazon Canyon 20 minutes ago. We must have missed it." "How could we miss a trading post?" she said. "I don't know," Baker said, stared at the road ahead. "But there's nothing out here. Are you sure you want to do this? I mean, we can get great Navajo rugs in Sedona. They sell all kinds of rugs in Sedona." "Sedona," she sniffed, "is not authentic." "Of course it's authentic, honey. A rug is a rug." "Weaving." "Okay," he sighed. "Oh, weaving." "And no, it's not the same," she said. "Those Sedona stores carry tourist junk. They're acrylic, not wool. I want the weavings they sell out on the reservation. And supposedly the trading post has an old sand painting weaving from the 20s by Hostine Cla, and I want it." "Okay, Liz." Personally, Baker didn't see why they needed another Navajo rug. Weaving. Anyway, they already had 24. She had them all over the house, and packed away in closets, too. They drove on in silence. The road ahead shimmered in the heat, so it looked like Silver Lake. And there were mirages. Houses or people rising up on the road, but always when you came closer, there was nothing there. Dan Baker sighed again. "We must have passed it." "Let's give it a few more miles," his wife said. "How many more?" "I don't know, a few more." "How many, Liz? Let's decide how far we'll go with this thing." 10 more minutes, she said. "Okay," he said. 10 minutes. He was looking at his gas gauge, and Liz threw her hand to her mouth and said, "Dan!" Baker turned back to the road just in time to see a shape flash by, a man in brown at the side of the road, and heard a loud thump from the side of the car. "Oh my God!" she said. "We hit him!" "What?" "We hit that guy." "No, we didn't. We hit a pothole." In the rearview mirror, Baker could see a man, still standing at the side of the road, a figure in brown, rapidly disappearing in the dust cloud behind the car as they drove away. "We couldn't have hit him," Baker said. "He's still standing. Dan, we hit him. I saw it." "I don't think so, honey." Baker looked again in the rear-view mirror, but now he saw nothing except the cloud of dust behind the car. "We better go back," he said. She said, "Why?" Baker was pretty sure that his wife was wrong and that they hadn't hit the man on the road. But if they had hit him, and if he wasn't even slightly injured, just a head cut, a scratch, this was going to mean a very long delay in their trip. He'd never get to Phoenix by nightfall. Anybody out here was undoubtedly a Navajo. They'd have to take him to a hospital, or at least to the nearest big town, which was Gallup, and that was out of their way. "I thought you wanted to go back," she said. "I do. Then let's go back." "I just don't want any problems, Liz." "Dan, I don't believe this." He sighed and slowed the car. "Okay, I'm turning. And he turned around, being careful not to get stuck in the red sand at the side of the road, and headed back to the way they had come. "Oh, Jesus." Baker pulled over and jumped out of the dust cloud of his own car. He gasped as he felt the blast of heat on his face and body. It must be 120 degrees out here, he thought. As the dust cleared, he saw a man lying at the side of the road, trying to raise himself up on his elbows. The guy was shaky, about 70, balding and bearded. His skin was pale. He didn't look Navajo. His brown clothes were fashioned into long robes. Maybe he's a priest, Baker thought. "Are you all right?" Baker said as he helped the man to sit up on the dirt road. The old man coughed. "Yeah, I'm all right." "Do you want to stand up?" he said. He was relieved not to see any blood. "In a minute." Baker looked around. "Where's your car?" he said. The man coughed again. Head hanging limply, he stared at the dirt road. "Dan, I think he's hurt," his wife said. "Yeah," Baker said. The old guy certainly seemed to be confused. Baker looked around again. There was nothing but flat desert in all directions, stretching away into the shimmering haze. No car. Nothing. "How'd he get out here?" Baker said. Come on, Liz said. "We have to take him to the hospital." Baker put his hands over the man's armpits and helped the old guy to his feet. The man's clothes were heavy, made of a material like felt. He wasn't sweating in the heat. In fact, his body felt cool, almost cold. The old guy leaned heavily on Baker as they crossed the road. Liz opened the back door. The old man says, I can walk. "Okay, fine." Baker eased him into the back seat. The man lay down on the leather, curling into fetal position. Underneath his robes he was wearing ordinary clothes, jeans, a checked shirt, Nikes. He closed the door and Liz got back in the front seat. Baker hesitated, remaining outside in the heat. How was it possible the old guy was out here all alone, wearing all those clothes and not sweating? It was as if he had just stepped out of a car. So maybe he'd been driving, Baker thought. Maybe he'd fallen asleep. Maybe his car'd gone off the road and he had an accident. Maybe there was someone else trapped in the car. He heard the old guy muttering, "Left it, heft it, go back now, get it now, and how?" Baker crossed the road to have a look. He stepped over a very large pothole, considered showing it to his wife, then decided not to. Off the road he didn't see any tire tracks, but he saw clearly the old man's footprints in the sand. The footprints ran back from the old road into the desert. 30 yards away Baker saw the rim of an arroyo, a ravine cut into the landscape. The footprints seemed to come from there. So he followed the footsteps back to the arroyo, stood at the edge, and looked down into it. There was no car. He saw nothing but a snake, slithering away from him among the rocks. He shivered. Something white caught his eye, glinting in the sunlight a few feet down the slope. Baker scrambled down for a better look. It was a piece of white ceramic about an inch square. It looked like an electrical insulator. Baker picked it up and was surprised to find that it was cool to the touch. Maybe it was one of those new materials that didn't absorb heat. Looking closely at the ceramic, he saw the letters ITC stamped on the edge, and there was a kind of button recessed in the side. He wondered what would happen if he pushed the button. Standing in the heat with big boulders all around him, he pushed it. Nothing happened. He pushed it again. Again, nothing. Baker climbed out of the ravine and went back into the car. The old guy was sleeping, snoring loudly. Liz was looking at the maps. Nearest big town is Gallup. Baker started the engine. Gallup it is. Back on the main highway, they made better time, heading south to Gallup. The old guy was still sleeping. Liz looked at him and said, "Dan." "What? You see his hands?" "What about them?" "The fingertips." Baker looked away from the road, glanced quickly to the back seat. The old guy's fingertips were red to the second knuckle. "So? He's sunburned." "Just on the tips? Why not the whole hand?" Baker shrugged. "His fingers weren't like that before," she said. "They weren't red when we picked him up. Honey, you probably just didn't notice them." "I did notice, because he had a manicure, and I thought it was interesting that some old guy in the desert would have a manicure." "Uh-huh." Baker glanced at his watch. He wondered how long they would have to stay in the hospital in Gallup. Hours, probably. He sighed. The road continued straight ahead. Halfway to Gallup, the old guy woke up. He coughed and said, "Are we there? Are we where?" "How are you feeling?" Liz said. "Feeling? I'm really fine, just fine." "What's your name?" Liz asked. The man blinked at her. "The quantum phone made me roam." "But what's your name?" The man said. "Name same, blame game." Baker said, "He's rhyming everything." She said, "I noticed, Dan." "I saw a TV show on this," Baker said. "Rhyming means he's schizophrenic." "Rhyming is timing," the old man said. And then he began to sing loudly, almost shouting to the tune of the old John Denver song. "Quantum phone makes me roam to the place I belong. Oh, black rocky country byway, quantum phone, it's on Rome." "Oh boy," Baker said. "Sir," Liz said again, "can you tell me your name?" "Niobium may cause opprobrium. Hairy singularities don't permit parities." Baker said, "Honey, this guy is nuts. A nut by any other name would smell like feet." But his wife wouldn't get him up. "Sir, do you know your name?" "Call Gordon," the man said, shouting now. "Call Gordon, call Stanley, keep in the family." "But sir—" "Liz," Baker said, "leave him alone. Let him settle down, okay? We still have a long drive." Bellowing, the old man sang, "To the place I belong. Oh, black magic is so tragic, country phone makes me groan." And immediately he started to sing it again. "How much farther?" Liz said. "Don't ask." He telephoned ahead, so when he pulled up the Mercedes under the red and cream-colored portico of the McKinley Hospital trauma unit, the orderlies were already waiting there with a gurney. The old man remained passive, and they eased him onto the gurney, but as soon as they began to strap him down, he became agitated, shouting, "Unhand me! Unband me!" "It's for your own safety, sir," one orderly said. "So you say. Out of my way. Safety is the last refuge of the scoundrel." Baker was impressed by the way the orderlies handled the guy, gently but still firmly strapping him down. He was equally impressed by the petite, dark-haired woman in a white coat who fell into step with them. "I'm Beverly Sosi," she said, shaking hands with him. "I'm the physician on call." She was very calm, even though the man on the gurney continued to yell as they wheeled him into the trauma center. "Quantum phone makes me roam." Everyone in the waiting room was looking at him. Baker saw a young kid of 10 or 11, his arm in a sling, sitting in a chair with his mother, watching the old man curiously. The kid whispered something to his mother. The old guy sang, "To the place I belong." Dr. Sosi said, "How long has he been this way?" "From the beginning, ever since we picked him up." "Except when he was sleeping," Liz said. "Was he ever unconscious?" "No." "Any nausea or vomiting?" "No." "And you found him where? Out past Corazon Canyon?" "About 5–10 miles beyond. Not much out there," she said. "You know it?" Baker said. "I grew up around there," she said, smiled slightly. "Chinle." When they wheeled the old man, still shouting, through a swinging door, Dr. Sosi said, "If you'll wait here, I'll get back to you as soon as I know something." "It'll probably be a while. You might want to go get lunch." Beverly Sosi had a staff position in the University Hospital in Albuquerque, but lately she had been coming up to Gallup 2 days a week to be with her elderly grandmother. On those days she worked a shift in McKinley Trauma Unit to make extra money. She liked McKinley, with its modern exterior painted in bold red and cream stripes. The hospital was really dedicated to the community. And she liked Gallup, a smaller town than Albuquerque, and a place where she felt more comfortable with a tribal background. Most days the trauma unit was pretty quiet, so the arrival of this old man, agitated and shouting, was causing a lot of commotion. She pushed through the curtains to the cubicle where the orderlies had already stripped off the brown felt robes and removed his Nikes. The old man was still struggling, fighting them, so they had to leave him strapped down. They were cutting his jeans and the plaid shirt away. Nancy Hood, the senior unit nurse, said it didn't matter because his shirt had a big defect anyway, across the pocket, where there ran a jagged line where the pattern didn't match. He already tore it and sewed it back together. You ask me, pretty lousy job, too. "No," said one of the orderlies, holding up the shirt. "It's never been sewn together. It's all one piece of cloth. Weird the pattern doesn't line up, because one side is bigger than the other." "Whatever, he won't miss it," Nancy Hood said, and tossed it on the floor. She turned to Sosie. "You want to try to examine him?" The man was far too wild. "Not yet. Let's get an IV in each arm, and go through his pockets. See if he's got any identification at all. If he doesn't, take his fingerprints and fax them to D.C. Maybe he'll show up on a database there." 20 minutes later, Beverly Sosie was examining a kid who had broken his arm and sliding into third. He was bespectacled, nerdy-looking, and seemed almost proud of his sports injury. Nancy Hood came over and said, "We searched the John Doe, and nothing helpful. No wallets, no credit cards, no keys. The only thing he had on him was this." She gave Beverly a folded piece of paper. It looked like a computer printout, and showed an odd pattern of dots in a grid-like pattern. At the bottom was written, "Monster Mare." "Monster Mare? Does that mean anything to you?" Hood shook her head. "You ask me, he's psychotic." Beverly Sosie said, "Well, I can't sedate him until we know what's going on in his head. Better get skull films to rule out trauma and hematoma. Radiology's been remodeled, remember, Bev? X-rays will take forever. Why don't you just do an MRI? Scan total body, you have it all." "Order it," Sosie said. Nancy Hood turned to leave. "Oh, and surprise, surprise, Jimmy's here from the police." Dan Baker was restless, just as he predicted. They'd had to spend hours sitting around the waiting room at the McKinley Hospital. After they got lunch, burritos and red chili sauce, they had come back to see a policeman in the parking lot looking over their car, running his hands along the side door panel. Just seeing him gave Baker a chill. He thought of going over to the cop, but decided not to. Instead, they returned to the waiting room. He called his daughter and said they'd be late. In fact, they might not even get to Phoenix until tomorrow. And they waited. Finally, about 4 o'clock, when Baker went to the desk to inquire about the old man, the woman said, "Are you a relative?" "No, but—" "Then please wait over there. Doctor will be with you shortly." He went back and sat down, sighing. He got up again, walked over to the window and looked at his car. The cop had gone, but now there was a fluttering tag under the windshield wiper. Baker drummed his fingers on the windowsill. These little towns, you get in trouble. Anything could happen. And the longer he waited, the more his mind spun with scenarios. The old guy was in a coma. They couldn't leave until he woke up. The old guy died. They were charged with manslaughter. They weren't charged, but they had to appear at an inquest in 4 days. But somebody smaller... Oh, when somebody finally came to talk to them, it wasn't the petite doctor. It was the cop. He was a young policeman in his 20s, in a neatly pressed uniform. He had long hair, and his name tag said James Walnicka. Baker wondered what kind of name that was. Hopi or Navajo, probably. "Mr. and Mrs. Baker?" Walnicka was very polite, introduced himself. "I've just been with the doctor. She finished her examination, and the MRI results are back. There's absolutely no evidence he was struck by a car, and I looked at your car myself, no sign of any impact. I think you may have hit a pothole and just thought you hit him. Road's pretty bad out there." Baker glared at his wife, who refused to meet his eye. Liz said, "Is he going to be all right?" "Looks like it, yes." "Then can we go?" Baker said. "Honey," Liz said, "don't you want to give him that thing you found?" "Oh, yes." Baker brought out the little ceramic square. "I found this near where he was." The cop turned the ceramic over in his hands. "IDC," he said, reading the stamp on the side. "Where exactly did you find this?" "About 30 yards from the road. I thought he might have been hit in a car that went off the road, so I checked. But there was no car." "Anything else?" "No, that's all." "Well, thanks," Monica said, slipping the ceramic in his pocket, and then he paused. "Oh, I almost forgot." He took a piece of paper out of his pocket and unfolded it carefully. "We found this in his clothing. I wonder if you had seen it." This is the paper that they found with the dots. Baker glanced at the paper, a bunch of dots arranged in grids. "No," he said, "I've never seen it before." "You didn't give it to him?" "No." "Any idea what it might be?" "No," Baker said, "no idea at all." "Well, I think I do," his wife said. "You do?" the cop said. "Yes," she said. "Do you mind if I, She took the paper from the policeman. Baker sighed. Now Liz was being the architect, squinting at the paper judiciously, turning it this way and that, looking at the dots upside down and sideways. Baker knew why. She was trying to distract attention from the fact that she had been wrong, and that his car had hit a pothole after all, and that they had wasted a whole day here. She was trying to justify a waste of time, and somehow give it importance. "Yes," she said finally, "I know what it is. It's a church." Baker looked at the dots of the paper, and he said, "That's a church?" "Well, the floor plan for one," she said. "See, here's the long axis of the cross, the nave. See, it's definitely a church. And the rest of this image, the squares within squares, all rectilinear. It looks like, this might be a monastery," the cop said. "A monastery?" "I think so," she said. "And what about the label at the bottom, Monstemer? Isn't mon an abbreviation for monastery?" "I bet it is. I'm telling you, this is a monastery." She handed the picture back to the cop. Pointedly, Baker looked at his watch. "We really should be going." "Of course," Monica said, taking the hint. He shook hands with them. "Thanks for all your help. Sorry for the delay. Have a pleasant trip." Baker put his arm firmly around his wife's waist and led her out into the afternoon sunlight. It was cooler now. Hot air balloons were rising to the east. Gallup was a center for hot air ballooning. He went to the car. The fluttering tag on the windshield was for a sale of turquoise jewelry at a local store. He pulled it from behind the wiper, crumpled it, and got behind the wheel. His wife was sitting with her arms crossed over her chest, staring forward. He started the engine. She said, "Okay, I'm sorry." Her tone was grumpy, but Baker knew it would be all he would get. He leaned over and kissed her cheek. "No," he said. "You did the right thing. We saved the old guy's life." His wife smiled. He drove out of the parking lot and headed for the highway. So I'm going to stop there. We're on page 17 if anybody's interested in reading along. I was going to read 2 bits at a time. There aren't really chapters. There are just kind of the sections of the book. The first couple of bits are going to go pretty quickly, so I'll read 1 or 2 sections at a time. Once we get into the end, though, it's going to be like 1 at a time because they're really long. But thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a good day.